Most men who talk about the brutal truth about women are just ranting from their last breakup. Arthur Schopenhauer was different. He tried to turn his disappointment with life, love, and desire into a cold, brutal philosophy. In the 19th century, he wrote some of the harshest lines ever penned about women, lines so extreme that even many philosophers refused to touch them. But here's the real question. Was he uncovering something deep about human nature, or just dressing up his own bitterness as truth? In this episode of Seductive Wisdom, we're going to break down Schopenhauer's perspective on women without turning it into blind hate or blind defense. We'll look at what he actually said, why he saw romantic love as a trap of nature, why he believed men are easily manipulated by their own desires, and how his pessimism still echoes in modern red pill talking points. At the same time, we'll separate what is real psychological insight from what is just wounded ego dressed up as philosophy. The goal is not to attack women and not to worship them, but to understand how one of the darkest minds in philosophy tried to make sense of them, and what that reveals about men. Before we dive in, I want you to be completely honest. When you hear a title like this, what do you expect? Genuine philosophical analysis or another emotional rant against women? And more personally, have you ever felt like your experiences with women confirm some brutal truth you couldn't say out loud? Let me know in the comments what drew you to this video and whether you think Schopenhauer was a clear-eyed realist or just a highly educated romantic pessimist. 1. Schopenhauer versus romantic love. Schopenhauer looked at romantic love and basically said, "This isn't magic, it's biology in disguise." While society likes to present love as something pure, spiritual, and noble, he saw it as a clever trick played by nature to keep the human species going. In his view, when a man becomes obsessed with a woman, sacrifices his time, money, peace, and sometimes dignity, it's not because his soul found its other half. It's because the blind will to reproduce hijacked his brain. Romantic love for him was not a blessing. It was a kind of temporary madness that makes intelligent men behave irrationally. Because of this, Schopenhauer thought men massively overestimate what they're actually chasing. He believed a man in love thinks he's pursuing happiness, companionship, or a special connection. But what's really happening underneath is the will of the species using him as a tool, the intensity, the jealousy, the obsession. All of that, he argued, is nature pushing two people together because their combination might produce certain kinds of children. Once that mission is accomplished or blocked, the feelings often fade, and the man is left wondering how he ever became so blind. For Schopenhauer, that crash, the disappointment after the high, was proof that love had tricked him. When you strip away the old-fashioned language, his core message to men is brutally simple. Don't confuse emotional intensity with truth, and don't assume your strongest feelings are automatically wise. You can disagree with his harshness toward women and still learn from his suspicion of romantic idealization. Instead of seeing love as a pure, mystical force, he pushes you to ask, what am I actually chasing here? Is this about shared values and character? Or am I just under the influence of desire dressed up as destiny? That shift alone can turn you from a man who gets dragged around by his emotions into a man who can feel deeply, but still see clearly. 2. Women as nature's trap. Schopenhauer went even further and described women as nature's trap for men. Not because he thought women were secretly plotting against men, but because he believed nature uses women as bait. In his view, the female form, her voice, her softness, her apparent vulnerability, all operate like a magnet pulling men out of their rational, controlled state. A man might be disciplined, ambitious, and logical in every other area of life. But when desire locks onto a particular woman, all that structure can crumble for Schopenhauer. this wasn't romance. It was nature exploiting a weakness. He argued that women, consciously or not, become guardians of this trap. Their beauty, charm, and emotional intelligence give them power over men who are ruled by their instincts. A man thinks he's freely choosing, but Schopenhauer would say he's being guided by forces he doesn't fully understand. Her youth, her fertility, her appearance, the potential for certain types of children. That's why he believed men often look back on their most intense attachments with confusion or even regret. They weren't evaluating character, compatibility, or long-term sanity. They were hypnotized by a biological pull wrapped in poetic words. You don't have to accept his extreme negativity toward women to see the warning built into this perspective. The trap isn't that women exist or that they're attractive. The trap is when a man lets attraction overrule judgment. When he ignores red flags, values, and his own standards because he's locked onto a face, a body, or a fantasy. He's exactly the kind of man Schopenhauer was talking about. The lesson isn't hate women. It's don't hand over your entire life to a feeling you haven't examined. A grown man should be able to want a woman, appreciate her, even love her deeply without surrendering his clarity, his boundaries, or his future to nature's automatic programming. 3. Desire, power, and manipulation. Schopenhauer believed that wherever there is strong desire, there is always a power imbalance. The person who wants more automatically has less power. When a man is emotionally and sexually fixated on a woman, he is in the weaker position because she now has something he feels he must have. From his perspective, this is exactly where manipulation becomes possible. Not necessarily because every woman is evil, but because human nature tends to use leverage when it appears. If one person is desperate and the other is calm, the calm one holds the cards. He thought women, by understanding men's desire instinctively, often learn how to control access to attention, affection, and intimacy to shape male behavior. This doesn't have to look dramatic. It can be as simple as rewarding certain actions with warmth and punishing others with coldness, distance, or guilt. Over time, the man adjusts himself, his opinions, his boundaries, his lifestyle, just to keep her approval. Schopenhauer would say that at this point it's no longer about truth or principle. It's about the will to please driven by fear of losing her. Desire has quietly turned into a chain. The danger in his eyes is that a man under the spell of desire stops asking the most important questions. Is this fair? Is this honest? Is this good for my life long term? Instead, his only question becomes, will this make her stay? That is the exact moment where he becomes easy to manipulate. Not because he's stupid, but because his craving is stronger than his standards. You don't have to accept Schopenhauer's full bitterness to understand the core point. Whenever your desire for someone becomes so strong that you're willing to betray your own values to keep them, you've handed them the power to shape you, and not always in a direction that respects who you really are. 4. Pessimism or harsh realism. At this point, it's easy to write Schopenhauer off as just a bitter old man who hated women. And to be fair, a lot of his writing really is soaked in personal frustration and negativity. He never married, he had difficult relationships, and he projected a lot of his disappointment with life onto women and romantic love. So yes, part of what you're reading is clearly personal pain dressed up as philosophy. If you take him literally and uncritically, you'll end up in a warped, one-sided view where women are mostly tools of nature and men are mostly victims of their own desire. That's not balance. That's wounded bias. But if you throw all of his ideas away, you miss something valuable. Underneath the exaggeration is a harsh realism that many men only discover the hard way. Your feelings are not sacred, your desire is not wise, and romantic love can absolutely make you blind to reality. Schopenhauer forces you to confront how easily smart men can become irrational when a woman triggers their fantasies, how quickly soulmate language can hide basic incompatibility, and how nature doesn't care about your happiness. It cares about reproduction and survival. He might be too dark, but his darkness shines a light on places most men prefer not to look. The intelligent move isn't to worship Schopenhauer or to cancel him, it's to separate his insight from his bitterness. His pessimism becomes useful when you use it as a counterweight to your own romantic illusions. When you feel yourself idealizing a woman, ignoring red flags, or rewriting reality just to keep a fantasy alive, his voice is a reminder. Check what's driving this. Is it clear judgment, or is it nature pushing you around? That doesn't mean love isn't real or that women can't be loyal, deep, and kind. It means you approach all of that with open eyes, not as a boy chasing a fairy tale, but as a man who can feel deeply and still see the world for what it is. 5. What men should actually learn. If you're not careful, Schopenhauer's perspective can turn you into exactly what he became: cold, cynical, and emotionally shut down. That's not the goal. The point is not to hate women or avoid love forever. The point is to stop walking blindly into situations where your own illusions destroy you. What men should actually learn from him is simple. Never let desire outrun discernment. You can find a woman attractive, charming, even magnetic, without immediately handing her the keys to your peace of mind, your wallet, and your future. Attraction is a signal, not a command. You should also learn to separate a woman's image from her character. Schopenhauer's big warning is that nature decorates the package very well. Youth, beauty, softness, attention. But none of that tells you whether she's honest, loyal, disciplined, empathetic, or aligned with your values. A wise man slows down long enough to watch how she behaves under stress, how she handles conflict, how she treats people who can't give her anything, how she responds when she doesn't get her way. That is where you see the real person. If you ignore all of that because you are intoxicated by how she makes you feel, you're not a victim of women. You're a victim of your own refusal to see finally. The real takeaway is that your power as a man lies in your ability to stay grounded while you feel deeply. Schopenhauer shows what happens when pain turns into complete rejection of love and women. You don't need to copy that. Instead, you use his harshness as armor against naivety, not as a prison around your heart. You remember that you have a life purpose outside of any relationship, that your standards are not negotiable just because someone excites you, and that love is only healthy when you can look at the person clearly, not through the fog of desperation. If you learn that, you don't become a hater of women. You become a man who can choose wisely among them. Schopenhauer's view of women and love is brutal, unfair in places, and deeply colored by his own pain. But that's exactly why it's useful to study. Not because he was right about women, but because he exposed how vulnerable men become when they let desire, fantasy, and desperation run their lives. If you walk away from this video thinking women are the problem, you miss the point. The real message is that your lack of clarity, your tendency to idealize, and your willingness to ignore reality are what make you easy to break. Philosophy is not here to give you excuses, it's here to give you X-ray vision on your own illusions. Now I want to hear from you. Which part of Schopenhauer's perspective hit you the hardest? His view of romantic love as a trap, his idea of women as nature's bait, his thoughts on desire and manipulation, or the warning hidden in his pessimism? Have your own experiences with women ever made you feel like he was onto something, even if you don't fully agree? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you've watched to the end and you're committed to becoming a man who can feel deeply and see clearly, type seductive wisdom in the comments so I know you're part of the audience that actually reflects, not just reacts. If this episode of Seductive Wisdom gave you a clearer lens on love, desire, and your own vulnerability, don't just click away and forget it. Save the video, send it to a friend who is either too naive or too bitter, and use it as a reminder to stay in the middle. Not worshiping women, not hating them, but understanding them while mastering yourself. The more you do that, the less likely you are to end up like Schopenhauer, consumed by disappointment, and the more likely you are to build relationships that respect both your heart and your reason.